Wes Streeting has announced a so-called wealth tax on BBC show Political Thinking with Nick Robinson. Let's take a look.
One of the things that I'm putting out as part of my campaign is a proposal for a wealth tax that works. And what I'm proposing to do is equalise rates of capital gains and income tax. I'm proposing that for a few reasons. Firstly, there's a fundamental issue of fairness, and a case I've made for a long time, which is it is just not fair that a cleaner employed, in this country would pay a lower marginal rate of taxation than a landlord whose assets are appreciating in value. And so the approach that I'm setting out and the kite that I'm flying in this leadership contest will be to equalise those rates with allowances for genuine entrepreneurialism, investment, reinvestment, so that we can be both pro-worker, pro-entrepreneurialism, pro-fairness, and in the course of that, generate up to £12 billion worth of revenues that can be invested.
As he explained, the policy is to equalise income and capital gains tax. As we know, when it comes to income tax, we have three bands, 20%, 40% and 45%. With capital gains, there are only two, the basic rate of 18% and the higher rate of 26%. According to Centax, they estimate that equalising capital gains will bring in £14 billion. Many people have claimed our current tax system is unfair, workers being taxed more than those that earn a passive income, such as landlords. Wealth taxes have been popularised by the Green Party and Gary Stevenson. Tax expert Dan Needle has come out in support of Streeting's plans. Stunned, appalled, shocked, etc. to see actual tax reform from a politician. This from Wes Streeting today. A thread on why capital gains tax is broken, it's too low and too high, and why this is a good proposal. It then led to this exchange. Joe Lever, Greens have been proposing this for some time, Dan Needle, no, they propose hiking the rate but not an indexation allowance, economically dangerous and will raise much less than anticipated. I wrote about it when covering election manifestos. What is Needle referring to when he mentions indexing? Well, under Streeting's plans, tax rates will be adjusted for inflation. Therefore, if on paper it looks like someone has made more from capital, but in actuality it's a result of inflation, this would be adjusted to make sure that you wouldn't be taxed more. Needle may be referring to the Laffer curve, which is a theory that there is a sweet spot for taxation. Tax too little, not enough revenue for the Treasury, tax too much, divestment and capital flight. Note that this is a theory that not everyone shares. Of course, there's no surprise that the right wing have jumped in with these ill-informed takes.
I don't think, from Labour's point of view, it is usually about bringing in vast amounts of revenue. It's a social thing, isn't it? It's a class warfare thing. It's what they stand for. So they say wealth tax the rich, because Labour supporters love that, Labour Party members love that. But actually, as a matter of fact, as a way of raising the kind of income tax revenue that this nation needs, taxing the rich, it's just a drop in the ocean, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a drop in the ocean. Like the wealth tax proposals proposed by people like patriotic millionaires and even some Labour backbenchers have argued that a wealth tax, a proper wealth tax on assets, would raise about 25 billion pounds every single year. Now, let's be honest, that's not going to raise that amount of money, because lots of rich people will just essentially leave the country, as they already are doing, Kevin. But even if let's take it as true that it will raise 25 billion pounds a year, that barely scratches the size of our welfare bill, that barely scratches the side of our immigration bill, that barely scratches the side of our debt interest bill, which is over 110 billion pounds a year at this point. So basically, their one solution to all of the country's problems isn't even going to raise the money needed to solve all the country's problems.
Tory peer Daniel Hannan said, a wealth tax will drive entrepreneurs overseas, reduce revenue and harm growth. It will tackle regional inequality only in the sense of destroying wealth. If it commands huge public support, that is because politicians shamelessly appeal to the most ignorant voters. Curtis, I know you love talking about taxes. What's your take on Streeting's plans?
I mean, we all expect the arguments. It was, oh, you tax people too much and they leave. So let's break this down into different parts. I'm going to talk about the economic side, and then I'm going to talk about the political side. The economic side. This is not a wealth tax. Okay, it's important to say it's not a wealth tax. He's simply increasing capital gains tax. That's not a new tax. Okay, we wouldn't say that if we were to increase income tax, say the top band, from 45% to 50%, we wouldn't say it's a new tax. We would say we are just increasing an existing tax. That's what Wes Streeting is planning to do. Now, don't get me wrong. It is the absolute correct decision to equalise capital gains and income tax. It's absolutely shameful that those who make their capital not through work but through assets, namely housing, because guess what? I'm going to talk about landlords in a second. That to me is crazy that you're taxed less than when you go out to work. And of course, the line that's been popularised by Gary Stevenson, tax wealth not work, is very effective because that's exactly what it is. So Wes Streeting is correct to say we need to essentially tax wealth, okay? And it's not fair that, a landlord can pay effectively less tax than a cleaner. Okay, so it's crazy that happens. But he's not being truthful when he says this is a wealth tax, when he calls it a wealth tax that works. The wealth tax is one that's been proposed by the Green Party, which is a tax on wealth on those that derive an income of £10 million or more from assets of 2%. So that's a completely separate wealth tax. Now, the negatives of both Wes Streeting's tax and the Green Party's taxes, it does not go far enough. Absolutely not. Because the point of taxes isn't to bring in money for the Treasury. Wes Streeting says it brings in £12 billion a year for equalising the capital gains taxes. Ultimately, it's not about bringing in money. It's about reducing inequality. Because we have a central bank with a sovereign currency, we don't rely on people's taxes to spend. We can just spend the money, and then we tax it out of existence. Why do we have taxes in the first place? Well, we have to have taxes, one, to get people to work. There's a brilliant line in Stephanie Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth, where she talks about how, and she was speaking to someone else, where the idea of taxes came about was so that you could work to pay taxes. So the example, I believe, was I'm going to get my kids to clean the house for me. And I'll say, I want you to clean the house. They've got no incentive. So this man who spoke to Stephanie Kelton says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell my kids, if you clean the house, you're all going to get a token. And then at the weekend, you can spend that token on sweets or ice cream. So he's invented something for the kids to pay back. That's kind of what taxes really are, okay? Not saying they're not important, though. It's obviously it's developed since its first introduction, but it's kind of a way to get people to work. But secondly, it's about controlling inflation. So the government cannot run out of money. You cannot run out of money. When I say this, especially on Twitter, people lose their shit. Like, this guy doesn't know anything. He's economically illiterate. Pretending that the economy is like a household budget, that's economically illiterate. You can't go bankrupt, okay? We cannot do that. We have a sovereign currency. So if we spend money on schools and hospitals, etc., that's great. If we spend maybe too much money in a particular area, that's where inflation happens. So if inflation starts to creep up, you need to take money out of the economy, and you do that by taxes. That's why we have tax in the first place. Now, currently, our economy is completely skewed towards the 1%, the multi-millionaires and the billionaires. They have all of the income. They're too rich, okay? This is not an envious argument. It's what Gary Stevenson says. If you have an economy in which the people at the top own everything or have enough money to buy up all the assets, what happens? It means ordinary people can't get those assets, like housing, for example. That's the reason why we have a housing crisis. It's not because we don't build enough homes. There's a million empty properties in this country. The idea that it's simply just to do with the amount of houses being built, that's crazy. I'm not saying we should stop building houses or not build a lot of housing, but it's important to make sure we have council houses and to take power away from landlords. So when you have assets and you can derive an income from your assets, you get unbelievably rich. And you price everybody out. So that's why we need wealth taxes. It's not to bring in money for the Treasury, but it's basically to make the richer poorer. I'm sorry if that sounds like it's envious. It's not supposed to be envious. It's simply because it's unsustainable to have an economy where you have a handful of people owning so much. So that is why, to sort of circle back, that is why Wes Streeting and the Green Party's proposal doesn't go far enough because they communicate the taxes in a way that still kind of says we're doing it for money, we're doing it for revenue. Like, hey, we're not going to tax you very much, but it brings in £12 billion a year, etc. And it's like, but the point isn't to bring in money. Therefore, you need wealth taxes of like 50%. Now, why are the Greens not calling for that kind of that large tax, shall I say? Or why they're not calling for a 50% wealth tax? Is because it would be unpalatable, and it's the smart thing to do, right? You would have to make a very, very small concession, say it's only a small tax to push the dial. So Wes Streeting, again, like his rebalancing of income and capital gains taxes won't really do anything at all. It is a fair policy. It just won't do very much. Now, the political side. I don't believe Wes Streeting. This guy is on the right of the Labour Party, like the very right of the Labour Party. He's championed privatisation. He's never really spoken about this before. I think when he was a Labour student, he may have talked about this, but really hasn't pushed for it. Funny, though, that there's a leadership election happening. And not only does the country like wealth taxes, the Labour membership likes wealth taxes. So Wes Streeting is simply pitching himself to the membership, hoping that maybe people might start to vote for him because, oh, you know what? Wes Streeting's going to bring in the wealth tax. This guy won't do it. He absolutely will not do it. And if he does do it, just equalising capital gains with income tax, again, that's not a wealth tax. You're simply just increasing capital gains taxes. So the media have been talking about this being wealth tax. It's simply not true.
I think I 100% agree with you that it's definitely not a wealth tax. And I think it's kind of being framed as that and being called that so that it sounds appealing to the membership, as you said, with the sort of leadership race coming up. You kind of touched on it briefly at the start, but what's your response to when right-wingers do make claims that if you bring in wealth taxes, if you tax the rich, more they're going to leave, all of that kind of jazz.
My favourite pastime is to tackle right-wing myths and their economic illiteracy. The irony here is that the left always paint as those that don't understand the economy. It's not true. It's absolutely not true. The right-wing buy into orthodox macroeconomics, which is that the government's like a household budget, right? So first of all, when they say a wealth tax won't work because the rich leave, it's not true. Rich people do not leave. There was a study by Patriotic Millionaire and Tax Justice. They wanted to see if there was actually a mass exodus of rich people and if there was capital flight due to taxes. It's not true. Something like less than 1% of millionaires left. However, I've debated this on GB News, for example, and of course they are the capital channel, right? They're just funded by billionaires, so they push billionaire propaganda. They love to cite this newspaper article that says 10,000 millionaires left. If you're an individual millionaire, if you want to leave, you can fucking go, right? Let the door fucking kick you in the ass. It makes no difference to us. In fact, one could argue you're less of a fucking burden. Although again, I don't subscribe to that kind of economic thinking because it's all relative. But it doesn't matter. We don't need individual millionaires here. Okay, as I said, it's all relative. Less people paying taxes, but less people using the state. That's why when people say if there's too much immigration, it's bad on the state. It's not true, because when immigrants come here, they also contribute to the economy. They also contribute to demand. Tax receipts go up. So again, the states can expand and contract. So individual millionaires don't leave because we don't really need their income. Okay, we have 30 other million people we can derive taxes from for their income. The problem is wealth and it's assets, and you can't take that shit with you. So if someone says, if you're going to bring in a wealth tax, if you're going to increase capital gains, or if you're going to tax housing, like second and third homes, I'm going to leave. I'd be like, yeah, fucking buy then, because guess what? You're going to have to sell it, which is good, because the less assets that are owned by the wealth in society, the more we can enjoy and have it. The topic of landlordism is very salient. I really want to talk about landlordism because Samuel Leeds, a notorious landlord, has been in the news lately because apparently he kicked out one of his tenants because they voted for the Green Party and had anti-landlord propaganda. Now, I don't know how
that's true.
Well, I don't know how true it is because I don't know if he's allowed to do it. However, he might have done it before some of the renters' rights bill came in, but I'm not sure if that's even if that's even allowed. Regardless, though,
It definitely would not. That surely would not be legal.
I don't
in
know,
any
but
case.
it's an advertisement for to abolish landlords, because whether it's true or not, Samuel Leeds is contributing to the anxiety people have around housing and renting. And by the way, Samuel Leeds, he's a multi-millionaire. He's got fucking thousands of housing, or a thousand of houses in his portfolio. He came on the show. I debated him. I've
I was
handed his
gonna
ass
say
to
you've
him.
Had a little run in with him before,
I did.
haven't you?
Well, yeah, because I called him a scum landlord, and then he said to me, "Why don't we have a debate?" We debated, and I basically, it was facts versus feelings. He was like, "Well, not all landlords are bad, you know," and I was like, "I don't care. The point isn't about all landlords being bad. And the problem is, the very existence of landlords is predicated that someone is poorer than you."
I also love it though. He's like, "Oh, not all landlords are bad." It's like, but you are.
But you are the
bad
fucking
ones, like-
literally the bad one, though.
Yeah.
But yes, so Samuel Leeds is like the existence of landlords. You can only exist if someone is too poor to buy a house or doesn't get a loan from the bank. Therefore, they have to give you rent. And people like Samuel Leeds and so-called entrepreneurs, which, by the way, landlords are not entrepreneurs, they're leeches on society, they would say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, just work harder. I'm going to let you in on the secret. You can't have 7 billion landlords. You can't have 7 billion CEOs. Who's going to work for the CEO? Who's going to pay the rent for the landlord? The system of capitalism, and specifically the system of rentierism, is predicated on there being a infinite money glitch off your customer. Right? You cannot be a big-time landlord if everyone can own a home. Therefore, it is your incentive to have a housing crisis where people can't get on the property ladder. So you can't say as a landlord, well, I'm in my position because I work really hard. And tell you what, if you worked harder, you'd be in my position too. No, your very existence means that someone else out there is losing out. The only thing we should be doing is abolishing landlords altogether. Now, that doesn't mean that housing disappears, because landlords don't build housing. Builders do. People build housing, and guess what? It can be funded through the state, which is why, if we want to sort out this housing crisis, where the Green Party are completely right, we need to completely and utterly abolish private landlords. Half of them can be sold up and now are into the markets. There's more properties on the market, reducing prices, and the other half can be bought by the state and either sold really cheaply or rented out at cost price. So if you are renting off the state, you're not renting to pay for profits. And even if they charge you more than cost price, at least you know that your rent is going to go on public services, like the NHS, rather than paying some fucking lazy ass pricks mortgage, okay? And not just that, finally, because I'm going on to rant about landlords. There's one final thing.
Very passionate.
Very passionate. It's not just the fact that landlords are living off someone else's work, i.e., you could have a doctor or a nurse going to work and then part of their income is going on the rent, and that rent pays that person's mortgage plus profits. The thing that makes it really, really bad, and I don't think a lot of people talk about, is let's say you've got a particular tenant who has been in that same property their entire lives, lived there for 20, 30 years. They've paid 30 years in rents above market price, because that's, well, cost price even. But they have nothing to show for it. So when landlords say, "Oh, but I give out my rent at below market cost, right, on below market price, I'm really, really good," it's like, landlordism, even if you don't make much of a profit, is extremely exploitative in nature, because essentially what you do is have a tenant that is looking after your asset, that's keeping it clean, keeping it nice and tidy, making sure it all works for 30 years. And at the end of it, they don't get to keep the housing. You still keep the asset. So you're throwing away money for 30 years. Essentially, a tenant is looking after a landlord's asset, cleaning it from every single day, and then you paying the privilege to do so. And at the end of it, you get absolutely nothing.